After I told you about my uncle's telescope and what I saw through it that haunts me to this day, many of you expressed interest in keeping you informed as to what happened next. At the time, I had bigger things to worry about than writing my own demise, such as preventing that demise from happening in the first place. But after the events of the past 24 hours, and now that I am in a position to post them, I feel it's my duty to share them with you. Let me start by going back to the point right after I heard the news of the space debris on the TV. I spent most of the minutes immediately afterward pacing around my living room, racking my brains as to what the hell anyone was supposed to do in this situation. I couldn't call my parents, as they would probably think it was some sort of prank call and hang up. If I reported an alien rapidly approaching my location to 911, I'd be more likely to get thrown into a mental ward. And of course, my uncle was off the table. To call my condition a panic attack would have been an understatement. I was about to take shelter in my unfinished basement and hope for the best, when a knock came from the door. Turns out, I didn't need to call anyone after all. I hadn't seen Chris for almost 6 years, and yet I instantly recognized the man who stood outside my house. He was balder, his stubble more unkempt, his posture slouchier, and his eyes obscured by opaque shades. But he was still the same tall, broad-shouldered man of mystery I'd always known. "Uncle Chris?" The words tripped over each other as they spilled from my mouth in both relief and confusion. "How did you find out where I live?" "You probably already know why I'm here," Chris replied, his voice hoarse and worn out. "So I think it's in both of our best interests to skip the formalities and just get the hell out of here." The man paused to look down at his expensive as always watch. "Shit, it's passing through the asteroid belt now. We only have a few hours left." Should I pack?" I looked back into my house with uncertainty, the TV on, paperwork strewn out on the coffee table. I was still in a state of disbelief that any of this was happening. "You want to die because you took too long to choose your undies? Car, now!" Chris seemed a lot rougher around the edges now than I had ever seen him before in the past. It made me wonder what he'd been up to since we lost contact, and how it changed him. Right then though, doing what he said and not questioning why he said it was my best option. My only option, really. "Okay, let me just turn off the no time." Chris grabbed me by the arm. Despite his clear signs of aging, he was still just as strong as ever and practically dragged me to the front seat of his car before I could even shut the door. Several of my neighbors were out mowing or watering, like an alien wasn't inbound towards Earth at Mach 5, and gave odd looks at the stranger pulling me into his vehicle. I flashed a pleasant smile at them, just to dissolve any worries or urges to call the police they may have had. I sure as hell didn't need anything else coming after me. Chris drove like a madman through the winding streets, and it was only when he entered the interstate and our surroundings became nothing but flat, empty farmland that I felt safe enough to stop gripping the edge of my seat and actually say something to the guy who had just borderline kidnapped me. "So, I was assuming you would be telling me, but you wanna give me any info on the thing?" After a moment of silence, I thought perhaps Chris hadn't heard me or didn't know what I was referring to with the word thing. I was about to clarify, but the emergence of a long, harrowed sigh from the man's mouth signaled he knew exactly what I meant and clearly didn't enjoy talking about it. "A small, unknown terrestrial planet orbiting a star about 500 light years from Earth. That's its point of origin. As you probably figured out, it's been coming after you for the past 6 years, which means at its peak velocity, it was somehow able to greatly exceed light speed. Like any moving object though, it needs to slow down when approaching its destination, which means it reduced its speed exponentially the moment it entered our system. Of course, that buys us a little time to get you somewhere safe, but not much. And it's less and less time for every second I spend explaining this to you. For the sake of my own life, I respected Chris's request, not asking him anything else throughout the drive, and not even attempting to turn on the radio. Instead, I watched the cloudless sky out the window, wondering if the creature was somewhere above Earth's orbit right now. After what seemed like hours of deserted farmland, Chris turned onto a small country road, and then onto an even smaller gravel path, at last approaching what looked more like a prison than something related to NASA. A stark, unmarked concrete building with no windows, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. I wanted desperately to ask what the place was, but I remained silent up until the point he stopped the car in front of the facility, turning towards me to speak. Eli, I was careless. I will admit that now. I shouldn't have given you something that even I was barely trusted to have. It's my fault you're in this mess to begin with. Sorry. I was stunned for a brief moment, both because he was capable of apologizing for being such a weird uncle, and also because he would choose now of all times to do so, before quickly formulating my own reply. It's okay, Uncle Chris. It's partly my fault anyway. I was a stupid kid, and I shouldn't have stolen your key. Either way, I forgive you. Good. Now, let's get the hell out of this car. We ran across the gravel and into the entrance of the compound, guarded by what appeared to be 2 armed soldiers. Since when does NASA need guards? It's a blur in my memory what happened next, but I do know we ran past many armed guards and people in white coats in unfamiliar machinery before entering an elevator and going down for what felt like an eternity. Though we were alone again in said elevator, I still refrained from speaking. What was I supposed to say at that point? Luckily, when the doors finally opened, there was someone waiting there to break the silence. A stout, bespectacled man in one of those white coats stood in the long dim concrete tunnel into which we emerged. When he caught sight of us, his face lit up. "Christopher, long time no see." He approached my uncle, giving him an enthusiastic handshake that was only half-heartedly returned before grabbing my own hand. "You must be Elijah. You can call me Dr. Roth. I've heard a lot about you, you know." "Oh, that's good. I guess." I forced a smile out of common courtesy, my hand aching from his death grip. "We've been tracking your location for the past 6 years, Eli," Chris explained. "Not in a creepy way. We still gave you your privacy. We just needed to know where you were so we could get you to safety when the time came. The bunker you're standing in was designed by Dr. Roth himself, and it should be able to resist the presence of any and all extraterrestrial beings." Dr. Roth nodded in admiration of himself. "That's right. No way, no how, but Nicola's standing up to human ingenuity." "But Nicola?" I saw Chris roll his eyes. "It's his nickname for the thing. Pay no mind to it. He's always coming up with shit like that." "Well, it is accurate," I pointed out, doing a figurative faceplant of an attempt to inject some humor into the conversation. "You're safe now," Dr. Roth said. "But we still got a bit of time before Bon Nicola pays us a visit. In the meantime, there's something I'd like to show you. Shall we?" He beckoned further into the tunnel. I looked at Chris, who nodded begrudgingly, and we both began to follow the doctor into the bunker. For a bunker, it seemed to go on for a lot longer than it needed to, especially if it was only meant to protect one person. It seemed like an entire new floor to the compound, with various doors in the curved metal walls leading off to God knows what. At last, Dr. Roth stopped in front of one particular door at the far end of the tunnel, turning to face us. "I should mention, everything you've seen here is highly confidential. Not even high-level personnel at NASA know about it. So, I'm gonna need to take your phone and have you promise not to leak any of this to anyone." "Oh, of course," I replied, handing him my phone. It was a small sacrifice in return for being somewhere, but Nicola couldn't get me. The doctor gave me a gracious smile as he pocketed the device. "Your parents have been notified of your absence as well, of course. They've been told that you're on a faraway business trip to limit any chances of them attempting contact." Now, without further ado, Dr. Roth punched some code into the metal door, and it opened with a loud screech resonating through the tunnel. He flourished his arm in a welcoming motion, ushering us in, before following suit and shutting the door behind him. The room beyond had a strangely high ceiling, seeming to stretch far beyond the bunker, exceeding the boundaries of what would be able to protect me. But that didn't faze me, because my focus was on what occupied all that space. Stacked high to the ceiling were dozens and dozens of cardboard boxes. What's in them? I wondered out loud, my voice echoing throughout the chamber. Dr. Roth strolled past me until he reached the base of the cardboard mountain, reaching for one of the boxes that stood by itself on the floor. With surprising strength, he tore back the cardboard flaps until the contents of the destroyed box stood fully exposed. Look familiar? My eyes widened in recognition. It was disassembled, but I still recognized the parts of the telescope. Well, not the telescope, but the same model. An exact replica of the one Chris had given me all those years ago. Could all of the boxes in this room really contain one? Chris stepped further into the room behind me, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Dr. Roth was a partner of mine for a good number of years. He and I worked together to design a scope that would be able to closely observe worlds many light years away from our own. I mostly handle manufacturing of components, but Roth's the real mastermind behind the project. In fact, he's the only person who actually knows how it works. Dr. Roth concurred. No other telescopes like these exist outside of this room. I continued to stare up at the dizzying heights of the stacked boxes. But I don't get it. Why did you keep making so many more? Wasn't the first one too dangerous to be kept around? Been asking myself the same question for years. I heard Chris mutter under his breath. Dr. Roth walked back to me until he was standing directly at my side, turning his head up towards the ceiling to mirror my own. Oh well, the answer to that is very simple, Elijah. You see, your uncle thought that your experience with the telescope was a sign we should abandon the project completely. I, on the other hand, saw it for what it really was. An incredible opportunity. We had been observing that planet's surface long before your uncle gave you that telescope. But you were the first one to actually catch sight of its native life. How great of a coincidence was that? I guess it was pretty lucky. I admit it, withholding the fact that I wished I never even seen that native life. No such thing as luck, Dr. Roth chuckled. This is the future. Humanity's future. I'm sure you've heard the saying, offense is the best defense. Well, that applies both on our world and off it. Now that we can finally observe threats from a distance, humanity has the upper hand to anticipate attacks before they even happen. We can finally take the universe as our rightful domain and destroy any opposing forces that get in our way. Attacks? My brow furrowed, realizing that what Dr. Roth was saying was beginning not to make sense. But the creature I saw is attacking me, not the planet. Isn't the only reason it's here in the first place because I looked at it through that telescope? Before Dr. Roth could respond, an echoing boom sounded from above, seeming to shake the entire foundations of the compound. Yellow fluorescent lights flickered, small chunks of plaster and concrete showered down from the ceiling, and I swore I could hear distant screaming. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Chris fumble to look at his watch, checking something I couldn't see from this angle. When he looked back up, the unfamiliar presence of raw terror was in his eyes. Shit, it's fucking here. Roth, we need to get back into the bunker, now. Dr. Roth didn't move. Roth! Chris screamed in exasperation before dashing back to the door and attempting to wrench it open. No luck, it was locked and we were on the wrong side. My heart began to race as I realized we were in an atrium, a perfect environment for something to crash down from several levels above. Had Dr. Roth planned this? Why would he possibly want the thing to find us? To be in the same room as us? As me? I began to hear it. A sound that still turns my blood to ice when I think about it. The sound of multiple layers of steel and concrete being crushed to powder as an unimaginable force forged its path directly down to where we were standing. It was headed right for me. "Eli, help me get the door open!" I heard Chris cry in a final act of desperation. I ran to help him, preparing to give it my all, and catching sight of Dr. Roth's face as I did. He was wearing a sickening smile. I never reached the door. The upper layer of the ceiling was penetrated instantly, sending shockwaves through the chamber and knocking me off my feet. I caught sight of something, a blur that was enormous and yet fast enough to appear almost graceful shoot down to the floor. The tower of telescopes collapsed, glass flying everywhere. I raised my arm to protect myself, and when the barrage had stopped, I cautiously lowered it to the side I hoped I'd never see. It was here. It was about 10 feet tall, and its stone-like skin was heaving, a steam-like substance radiating from its body. It hovered just above the collapsed heap of glass and metal, its bunny ear appendages twitching, observing us just as I had observed it. Then, abruptly, it hurled itself the rest of the way down onto the floor, breaking the already shattered telescopes into smaller pieces. It rose back up again, only to repeat the process, to continue to smash the telescopes, to relentlessly fling its body against the floor over and over again, until it made sure not a single one was left intact, until each and every shard of glass was pummeled to dust. I have no idea how long we sat there watching it, but I do remember the dread hanging in the air when it finally stopped and continued to just stare at us. "Fascinating," I heard Dr. Roth muttering from behind me. It was targeting the object that had observed it, but all along that object was the telescope itself. No matter, I can always make more. I looked at Chris, the disbelief on his face disheartening. Not even he knew what was going on. What was happening right now hadn't been part of the plan. We briefly made eye contact, and I think seeing that I was still alive and kicking, was enough to knock him out of his stupor. "Roth, you crazy bastard!" my uncle screamed. "What the hell are you trying to do?" Roth turned around, his face and voice disturbingly calm despite the presence of an otherworldly being right in front of him. "I'm testing, Christopher. That's what our job has always been here, isn't it? This is simply one more test. If we are to bear witness to the behavior of this creature in an unrestricted environment, we are to better understand it. If we are to better understand it, we are to better destroy it. Destruction is the only path to true progress, and it always requires a bit of sacrifice." Sacrifice? He was talking about me. My uncle still looked furious, but I could tell he was tired. He had been working non-stop to prepare this place for me, and now that it had gone to waste, it was as if his purpose had been lost. When he pulled himself back on his feet and spoke again, it was in a low, panting growl, like an exhausted predator. "This plan of yours, Roth, does it include locking yourself in with the sacrifice? Because unless that thing simply lets you walk out of here, that's exactly what you've done." Dr. Roth laughed, a chilling, maniacal sound. "Of course I can leave. I just have to wait for the right moment. Now that it has destroyed all things with the power to see it, it's going to destroy the thing that saw it in the first place. You can leave with me too, Christopher, while it is distracted with what it is truly here for." Dr. Roth turned back around to face the creature. And I'm still not sure why, But what he did next deeply disturbed me. He began talking to it, his arms spread outward, flailing like mad. "Well, why don't you give into your inferior primal urges? Finish your hunt. Destroy the one you came here for. Destroy him so that we may destroy you." The creature continued to stare, its unblinking white-hot eyes burning into each of us, passing judgment with wordless fury. It looked at me, at Uncle Chris, and back to the doctor, its body only slightly turning each time, hovering just above the ground with almost imperceptible stillness. Then, in one swift motion, it descended upon the doctor and absorbed him into his being. Both Chris and I cried out in alarm as the doctor's life was ended with a muffled scream that dissolved into silence. My legs turned to jelly, unable to support my trembling body as I fell to my knees. I felt like cornered prey, petrified, unable to escape as the creature began to slowly approach. I was sure I was next, that me and maybe Chris too were about to meet the same fate as the doctor. It stopped, just a few feet away from me, and angled its levitating body downward so its white, radiant eyes were level with my own. We stared into each other, and somehow I could tell that it knew that I had never been the true threat. All it had wanted was to exist on its world without interference, and through some unknown clairvoyance, it had realized Dr. Roth challenged that existence. With the doctor and all its creations gone, any chance of being observed, of targeted, of needlessly wiped out by an over-aggressive force were gone. The creature felt safe now, and that was all it had ever wanted. It backed away, leaving me breathless on the floor, my skin still pierced with the shards of glass it had scattered across the room. It floated back to the center of the chamber until it was directly below the hole through which it emerged. And then, with unimaginable yet silent speed, it rocketed upward into nothingness. It was gone. It has been about 6 hours since this all happened. Chris and I got our cuts treated, and he drove me back to my house. I know I promised that I wouldn't post any information about the compound online. And I know that if it's seen by anyone from Chris's department, whatever the hell that is, it might get taken down. But I know that no harm will come to me. I don't know when I'll see Chris again, but I do know that if he's willing to protect me from aliens and crazy scientists, a few government hitmen should be no problem. The last thing Chris told me before he left was that besides a gaping hole in the NASA facility, there was no evidence left behind of the creature ever being on Earth. It had been so fast, there wasn't even any evidence of it entering the atmosphere in the first place. If I'm being honest, that's probably for the best. And not just because I don't want to be on the news. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that there are some things in this universe that simply want to be left to their own devices. And as long as you let them be, no harm will come to you or your world. But if you decide to interfere, you've been warned. This is Elijah, signing off.